Welcome to Talk Tantra to Me. It is such an honor to be holding space for this divine knowledge to make its way into your ears and lifestyle. Today, I talk Tantra with Daniel Saynt. They're an artist, sex prophet, and founder of NSFW, a dating club for the adventurous. I'm so grateful for their content and so appreciative that they're here on the podcast to offer their perspective of living an expansive life. So thank you for being here, Daniel. Why don't you start by telling us a bit about your journey with becoming an advocate for sex positivity and sex workers? How did you discover this passion and purpose?
Well, thank you so much for having me on. The journey has been a long one. I think for me personally, with my upbringing, growing up in something that was, very, very traditional Christian cult-like experience. I kind of was always just inundated with ideas around sex as being bad. Any sort of thoughts, any sort of impure things that you thought about were things that you had to report. You couldn't, do a lot of things. You couldn't, masturbate or obviously watch anything sexual. You couldn't have even, impure thinking. So growing up in that was very, very confusing for me. When I finally left and started exploring sexually, I went to a lot of different things. I, for myself, felt I was bisexual, so I wanted to try, many, many different things. And I went to gay spaces, I went to straight spaces, and I kind of explored for 10 years of just going to different places and seeing what was out there. And I just found that, there wasn't really a place that felt safe for me. There wasn't a place that felt, comfortable for me where, I could actually explore sexuality, where, consent was something that was appreciated, or where I myself didn't, felt safe. I really didn't feel comfortable in certain situations or even able to express my sexuality around certain people because of how these spaces were set up and because of what was available at the time. And after a few years of doing that, at the same time, growing within the fashion industry, becoming more and more successful there, becoming more recognized as, marketer and someone who was, trend forecasting for very, very large brands like Louis Vuitton and Burberry and working in that field. I kind of came to this moment of realization that so much of my work, so much of my effort was going into promoting things that didn't actually bring happiness. Consumerism, we were promoting this idea of, influencers at the time, which was like the big thing. And I was on that forefront, on that, bleeding edge of like, okay, this is where things are going. We're democratizing things in a sense. But in the end, what were we selling people, and what kind of imagery were we giving people, and what kind of feeling were we giving people when we were just selling products as a way to feel happy? So yeah, I kind of came to a point where my own bisexuality, I was ready to be more open and honest about. I really didn't see people out there who were men who were bisexual being open and honest about it. And I needed to create a space. I needed to create a place where that felt comfortable. I needed to feel like what I was giving my life to felt like it had real meaning, or a purpose. It didn't feel like I was just trying to sell people on something that didn't actually bring, something real in their lives. And that's kind of where NSFW came about. It was just, a personal desire to feel like I needed a space where I could feel comfortable being bisexual. I could be comfortable with my sexuality. I can learn about sex or enjoy sex, but do it in a way that was safe and judgment-free. And so, yeah, created the space. And now, 6-7 years later, we have 8,000 members. We are growing pretty quickly. We're training our first new groups of people to start their own parties and start building their own communities. And yeah, we now have a pretty strong grassroots effort focused around, this idea of sending positive messages around sex and encouraging people to hopefully have better and more joyful sex.
Absolutely. Thank you for the breadth of that answer. And I deeply resonate with this story. Obviously, as I had said before we started recording, I grew up in the Midwest, so very similar shame, guilt, fear around sexuality through the lens of religion. And we'll be going into that deeper in this podcast. But I also studied fashion in school. I studied apparel merchandising in Chicago and worked in the fashion industry, and also was just like, wow, this has like no real meaning beyond like, I love the idea of adornment and wearing things that are a reflection of our highest self. I have to say, you've got some incredible merchandise on your website too. I love like the cheeky t-shirts, and I definitely recommend that the listeners head to the website, which will, I'm sure, be linked in the show notes. Check out those t-shirts and get something fun. But How incredible is it that once we step into purpose and like we broaden our scope, that like everything falls into place. And now not only do you have this incredible community, but you're also supported, you know, financially and like by the community, like in every way. And I deeply resonate with that too. It was like as soon as I made that shift, like everything else started to kind of fall into place. So I would love to hear more about the NSFW community you've created. Like, what does it mean to be a member? What are like the inclusions? I'd love to go deeper into that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to it now. I think as we've grown, it's gotten more and more layered in terms of, you know, the types of members we have and, you know, the types of contributors we have to the project and to what we do. But yeah, people apply online. There is an application form. We ask various questions about their relationship to sex or what they're pursuing, or you know what they want to get out of the community, but also what they can give back to the community. What are they contributing to, like the experience of it? From there, we then kind of pick and choose who kind of makes the most sense and who has the best vibes within the community itself. This tends to be people who are more creative, more artists, more people who are a little bit more activist in terms of what they're approaching and how they're looking at sex. We are always grateful when we find people who are already part of sex positive communities, already aware of consent rules, already aware of how to behave in these spaces. But a lot of times it's people who just tired of dating apps, people who are exhausted with the process of finding partners and find like most of the experiences that they have out there feel a little bit more inauthentic. You're going to a club, there's loud music, you're not really having conversation, versus coming to a space where everyone's curated, you're meeting people, and it's designed for you to, learn about sex and be playful and be comfortable in sexual environments. And I think for a lot of people now, as they're trying to figure themselves out, that's a big part of why they join and why they're part of it. Once you're in the membership, there's usually about 3 to 4 events per week that we're hosting. We try to do like larger events for like more members where we can get 200 to 300 members in. It was like a big part of us pre-COVID, and now we're kind of adding all that back in. You can also support the community. So, we have guardians who work the events and to watch over everyone who's here. We have people who manage the spaces. We have performers and muses and resident experts who teach within the space. And everyone can come here and either learn or, enjoy or party or get to know new people, come to singles events, come to all these different types of things we do for the purpose of, giving the community more and giving them more options of things to check out and hopefully meet new members and hopefully date and get married and have babies and live amazing long lives that are sexually full and happy.
Oh, it warms my heart. It's so beautiful. I feel that before I started getting into these spaces, and still in many of these more sex positive spaces, the energy tends to be very like transactional, or that's what it's perceived to be. And to have a space where there's like depth and full expression, and like it's just so powerful for me. So I wanted to clarify too, the events are in New York, right? Is that correct?
Correct. We do New York events, and then we occasionally do virtual events. Through COVID, we're doing a lot more virtual. But now we just started our new training program for new conspirators. People can kind of develop their own communities within their own cities. So we go through our first training of that at the end of this month. And then hopefully we'll have a couple other little pop-up cities that start coming up and hopefully build those communities there so they can have the same experience we have here in New York.
That's incredible. What do you have any like sneak peek of the cities that are being developed in this way?
Yeah, so we have a strong base in Miami and Los Angeles. San Francisco is pretty strong as well. We're thinking about a secondary clubhouse here in New York to have something in Brooklyn, as well as the spot we have in Manhattan. And there seems to be a lot of interest in like Jersey and up as you move upstate from New York, because so many people travel so far to kind of get to NSFW. But we're honestly, it can exist in so many spots, because like the events we host can go up to 300 people, but for the most part, we're looking at 40 to 60 people coming together and having this experience and enjoying the space. There's a lot of spaces that can do that. There's a lot of places that can exist for that. A lot of private homes, a lot of places that members already currently own that can work for that. So as we start teaching the membership more and more about the benefits of creating these communities within their own areas, and not only the benefits from the community aspects, because there's obviously beautiful benefits that come from being a facilitator of that and creating that for people. Like I can't share enough how blessed I feel mostly in my life for everything that I do here, and I feel it come back so much more from what I give. I can feel like that give and take in terms of like providing that space for people. So I feel as more people understand that importance and understand that, you know, the need for community right now, the need for us to create safer spaces, the need for us to create spaces that are aimed to, protect people and teach people and bring people together is going to be so much more important. As we head into like the metavized world that we're about to go into, and people become more and more distant and more disconnected, more isolated, and in effect, more dangerous.
Yes, I love that. I love that so much. This idea of like even being in a space of holding space for other people in their healing of all of this conditioning and all of the shame that often comes with like unpacking our full sexual selves. Like being someone that creates that space is like so expansive and like so heartwarming and healing. So thank you for sharing that. It's definitely something that I'm thinking Austin needs this. Like I
Yeah.
host, I'm in Austin. I just moved here. And I host some events here, but not quite exactly that. So maybe I'll have to go to New York and check out what you're doing and see if I could become a conspirator. Is that what it is? Conspirator?
Yeah, co-conspirator.
Conspirator in Austin.
Yeah.
Cool. So I'd love to shift perspectives, shift into a different topic. And this next question is really why I wanted to interview you, because you posted something recently that just hit home so deeply that I was like, I have to talk to this guy. So you said recently that you're a sex worker, you mostly date sex workers, hire sex workers, and so you created this NSFW community that's obviously really sex positive and this beautiful space for community. And then you go on to say that doing all of this has been the most Christ-like thing you've ever done, the most Christ-like thing you've ever done. Oh, the blasphemy. But I deeply resonate with this so deeply. But I would love for you to, expand upon your reasonings for the listeners.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to look at it. I think when we talk about, when I personally talk about Christ and my feeling towards, religion and my feelings towards belief and my reasons for faith. And when I talk about that personally, it is a very personal thing for me. It is something that, I don't necessarily try to like preach out there or proselytize or try to encourage people to be more Christ-like. It's just something that I try to aspire to. And what that means for me is acceptance. What that means for me is accepting people, for who they are, accepting people for the mistakes they make, and accepting people for the decisions that they have to make in their life. And I think when it comes to the story of Jesus and it comes to like the books and the gospels, there are a lot of references to sex workers. There are a lot of references to, at the time, prostitutes, or what they would call them, a lot of references to adulterers or women who, cheated on their husbands or had sex with someone else. So there was a lot of references to that throughout, his work. And I think that what people forget is, when the religious leaders of the time came to Jesus and they came to him and they were asking about, punishment, punishment that should go for an adulterer, a woman who committed adultery. What should be the punishment? At the time, it was stoning, right? Technically, the punishment for adultery at the time was death. And they asked him, what should be her punishment? And that's when he brought up the parable of how we judge others and how you shouldn't judge, or throwing the first stone or casting that first thing. And it then went into the idea of like who would actually make it into the kingdom of heaven. And for me, it's like I believe in Jesus, but I'm not a divinity Christian. I don't believe he was divine. I just believe that the story got told and retold, and eventually it became profitable for him to become divine, because that would help establish the churches and why a lot of churches exist today. But when he talked about the kingdom of heaven, when he talked about the promised land, or to be in God's good favor, they said who would get in. And Jesus went to them and said, like, you religious leaders of today are going to have a lot more trouble than the tax collectors and the prostitutes of today from getting in. And he didn't say like, former prostitutes. He didn't say former tax collectors. He said literally, sex workers, literally, tax collectors are going to get it before the people who felt that they're most religious, people who felt they were most righteous, the people who felt they were most correct in their opinion of God. And I think that's very powerful messaging. I think that's really important to consider. And it's not something that, traditional Christians would ever consider, because the idea of someone being over sexual, the idea of someone making money from sex, or a woman owning her body and making a choice to, make money from it, is so against anything they believe and so sinful and so wrong and so evil. And I think people miss that. People don't really pay attention to what he said. It's more like what they were taught about what it means. And a lot of times when you look into certain scriptures, it really just show like, it's just a good example for how to try to be, and I think a lot of people miss that. And like, even though I'm not a religious person, even though I escaped from something that was very, very harsh and very, the untruth of Christianity or the way that Christianity is used against people, I still came out of it with a faith in this idea of, this person really trying to implement a change and really influencing people to change in a certain way. And I think that's always been inspiring to me, whether it's, Jesus or any other person out there who's like able to actually do that. That's a really, really powerful thing to do. So yeah, very Christian. It feels very, Christ-like in a sense. I am a sex worker. I do engage in like more BDSM type stuff for certain clients. And I have done it before as survival work or certain moments of time as like, helpful to get through work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's not something that we have to criminalize. I don't think it's something we have to stigmatize. I don't think it's something we have to, treat as wrong or treat as sinful. I think we really have to look at it as therapeutic. I think we have to look at it as healing. I think we have to look at it and for the real benefits of what it provides. It provides this way to get something that, it's hard for a lot of people to get. It's very, very difficult. And, we see it amongst decreasing sex rates. We see it amongst decreasing pregnancy rates, decreasing marriages, more and more 40-year-old virgins, which has never happened before. We're seeing sex on a decline in terms of actual experiences, more virtual, more sex styles, more everything else. And at the same time, strongly try to criminalize the only people who can actually provide a real connection for a lot of these people who will not have the emotional skills to actually connect with a real person.
Yeah, absolutely. Whores are healers. They really are. Like, seeing the benefit of having an intimate and connective interaction with someone is so profound and beautiful. And like, I like to say that whore etymologically means, like, the root of the word comes from holy woman. Prostitute is someone that prostrated at the altar, laid down at the altar. And like, so it's the patriarchy and the leaders of the church that spun this in a different way and added all this judgment. Like, if you look at Christ or Jesus's original teachings, like, they're completely different than what we're experiencing today. Even if you look at like the Council of Nicaea, which happened 300 years after 300-ish BC, that was when they decided what would go in the Bible. And it's like not even during his time. And it was completely, a marketing scheme. So it's really important to like get the facts straight, to be able to like let go of these beliefs that are just like super limiting, and could potentially be causing harm in your life or in someone else's life. So
yeah, I think we can't deny the power of that control, that power to be able to control people in that way. And I think, that's the one thing that religion did very well. They took very natural feelings that we have. They took natural emotions that we have. They took, things that we think about or might just normally feel, and they criminalized it. They made it a punishment. They made it wrong. And so, yeah, you're always going to have to pay back to the church to get rid of those wrong feelings that are already natural and already part of, you're being a human being, you're being alive, you're being, present right now.
yeah, absolutely. And just considering that like this is the most powerful energetic force in our bodies, like our sexuality created like our entire society, like all the people that we know, plants, animals, etc. So when you make people afraid of that energy, they're so much easier to control. And so understanding like, oh, maybe that is the reasoning here, and how can I reclaim that power, by processing this information. So thank you so much for going into that. I just love that topic and that new perspective. From here, I'd love to pivot into kind of getting into the like dynamic between individuals in the NSFW community, specifically in like, how do you deal with like creeps or those who cross boundaries or don't ask for consent? How do you create a space that is like based on safety, because I know even for myself, when I first started getting into these spaces, and to this day, when I go to certain sex parties, I'm like, this is not done, this is not done well. I don't feel safe. I'm not interacting here. So I'm curious, like, I think that that is just such an important piece to really bring this full circle.
Yeah, I think that's, a major part of how we have evolved and how we have created, safety nets within the community to help when those things happen. We are receiving a lot of member applications per week. We're processing and going through. We're trying to select the best people. But in the end, when you're in an environment like this and you're new to it, or you've been drinking or possibly doing drugs that we are unaware of, there's behaviors that can pop up that become unsafe. There's behaviors that can come up that are predatory or that make people feel uncomfortable. And so having a process in place to prevent that is very, very key for us. One is education, making sure that we are constantly educating our membership on the behavior that we expect from them. We have a code of conduct and a kind of a system of beliefs that we try to uphold within here. Things like creating an environment where people feel comfortable to hug or feel comfortable to ask for hugs, ensuring enthusiastic consent is practiced and ensuring people understand what that means, identifying creeper behavior and constantly informing the membership how it can be and what it can look like. I remember when we moved to like Discord chats, it became a whole different set of rules that we had to create where it's like, okay, don't just DM someone. You have to ask before you DM. Don't, send images. You have to do this. So you don't just comment on every single person making posts. Like, let people, don't seem so thirsty. Like we literally had to say like, don't seem thirsty and like teach people like, what does that mean? Because, people have very different behavioral patterns in these spaces. And, some people, can make mistakes. Obviously, there are times where you're dealing with someone where it feels more like than a mistake. It does feel predatory. It feels like something that is something that can be repeated. So removing those people, suspending them, making sure that they're going to consent training, or full on blacklisting, which is like being on blacklist for hours and other communities that exist around the area. So yeah, it's a lot of things, but it's a lot of policing. It's encouraging people to state boundaries, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily know how to do that. So teaching members, before they come here, what is your expectation? What are your boundaries for the evening, especially if you're coming with a date? Because a lot of times you can be in a situation and now you're in a group of people and like, what are the things that you and your partner stated is okay and not okay? What is comfortable? What's not comfortable? So making sure people know how to communicate around sex is important. And we try to offer ways in which we can teach that, whether through interviews, whether through videos that we shoot here or things that we send out to the membership so that they buy into it. That becomes key. We've been around now for 7 years. So there are times where like, someone committed something year one, and now it's like many years later, it's like, at what point are we allowed to let someone back in? Or is there a process of restorative justice? Are we looking at, these cases and deciding, whether or not this person is allowed to be part of a community again? Because a lot of times it's possible it's not. And so we're just constantly kind of going through this process. More recently, we brought on a psychotherapist to help with like situations where things are like a little bit beyond what we can control, because there are times where people will come to us with issues that happened in their relationship, or they come to us after a breakup. And it becomes a little bit more difficult to figure out certain situations. And you have both partners claiming the other one's the manipulator, both partners claiming the other one's the abuser. And you're like, what do we do? So we now have a psychotherapist who comes in and try to help mediate some of that stuff. We've also introduced this concept of kind of like a forgiving circle, or like a reconciliation circle, like kind of bringing people together. It's a practice that happens more within tribes, and it's kind of a practice within a lot of Native American tribes. And basically with the concept of that is like, you're bringing in the two parties. The two parties can bring in friends that are supportive. You bring in a community leader or someone else to kind of lead that. And then each person gets to share what harm was caused. Each person gets to share, how those things made them feel. And then a group decides, together with these people, like, what is the best thing? What is the best option for this? What is the next step for this? That's something that we've been introducing more for people who've been established within the communities for a long time, which there's sometimes conflicts within like performers and stuff like that. Just ways that we can help, I don't know, make people less divisive and more supportive of the overall mission of this, which I think is more important than some of these petty fights that end up happening, or petty, agreements that get flamed over or blow up, or just bad people in general, making sure that they stay out of here. I don't know. It's hard. It's a lot. It's like the whole category of like all the things that we try to do, and we try to be good about it and try to like encourage people to like, follow the process and work with us and like report people and police each other. And yeah, it gets a little crazy, especially as we head towards 8,000.
That's incredible. I don't think I've heard of anyone in this space with that much dedication to this process and like on every level. Like, first, you have this education piece, which is so fucking empowering and like really the cornerstone, probably. Like, it reminds me of when I went to India. I was there on a documentary crew doing the interviewing for a nonprofit that freed children from sex trafficking. And it was obviously like amazing work that they were doing. But to me, it also wasn't getting to the root of the issue, which was like, how do we create this society or this community that believes that the only way that they'll have their sexual desires met is through raping a child, And so it's like having obviously like completely different scenarios, but also seeing the overlap and like, how can education and like shifting the perspective be such a way to like completely change the environment that we're in? And then also the way that you encourage people to take accountability for themselves and for each other is super incredible. And going a step further with giving people the opportunity to correct, like, if you fucked up, like, fine, like, let's make sure that you can acknowledge that, and then we'll go through this process so that you can learn from your mistakes and ideally be welcomed back into this community, which is so rare and so beautiful. And having hired the psychiatrist is just like icing on the cake. So bravo, I absolutely love it. Cool. So I just have a couple more questions here. One is, what does it mean to say, don't yuck on someone's yum?
Yeah, I mean, I think it defines itself really now. That's the idea of, when you're in these environments, especially NSFW. I mean, there are, more sex clubs that are catering to straight people or catering more to couples, or spaces that are, strictly more for gay men. But in this environment, it's different. There is a big mix of identities. There's a big mix of people, diversities. It's really important for us to allow people to express, like literally the purpose of the creating the space was like, I went to a straight space once and kind of like made out with a dude and just could feel like how wrong that was to everyone who was in that room. And, it made me feel like, okay, this is something that should be shamed. So when we're trying to encourage people to not shame each other, don't yuck on other people's yum, is literally that. Like, let people celebrate their sexuality, let them celebrate their expression. It's not your place to make a face or feel uncomfortable or for you to display like some sort of disgust towards anything that you might see. And I think that's really important for people to keep in mind as they're in these spaces, and to respect those spaces as places where people can express, accept that you might see something that you're not necessarily used to. And I think for a lot of people, they might see something and it might be something that they're now curious about, or they're interested in, or they're considering. There's been a lot of moments like that have happened here with people who you would never, consider they would necessarily like even connect in certain circles, but now, they have a partnership now, they're hooking up now, they're enjoying, each other's company. And I think that's pretty powerful.
Absolutely. I love that. What I like to say is, good for you, not for me, right? And it's saying like, I validate your desire and your expression of your sexuality, even if it's not totally what I'm on board for. And I like to also encourage people, if you're having a strong reaction to some sort of like experience, whether it's sexual or otherwise, it's very often a invitation to look at, why is that triggering you? Like, what is going on in your shadow that is like so off-putting there? It's likely your conditioning. It may be like an existential kink that you might have. It might be something that like you are actually really interested in, but you haven't even had the opportunity or the invitation or the permission to explore it. And there's an episode on this podcast that's all about sexual shadow work, which I encourage the listeners to go to for more on that subject. But we're wrapping up with just a couple of last questions. Do you have anything else you'd like to add or you want to speak into, Daniel?
No, nothing in particular.
Okay, cool. Then I will continue with my bonus question. This is a question that I ask all the interviewees, and that is, what awakens your arrows? What turns you on? What makes you feel erotically alive?
Mm, I don't know. I think it's about being surrounded by like group sexual energy, like lots of sexual energies, and seeing many people kind of engaged definitely feels like a recharge. And I remember like, I've been hosting these now for close to 7 years. We do like 2 to sometimes 4, maybe even 5 parties a week. And like when COVID hit and we had to completely shut down, like I could feel like my battery decreasing. Like I could feel that energy that I had and that free kind of energy that was flowing through, like slowly just disappear in such a strong way. That yeah, I think that's like what really charges me up. It's like being able to create that and also being able to just like experience it with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something really special about being in a room of people that are so embodied and so comfortable with claiming who they are, and just allowing that energy to like vibrate around the room is super powerful and beautiful. So I resonate. And last question here: where can listeners find you and or support you?
Yeah, just Daniel Saynt, Saynt, on any of the socials. I'm usually there. And then we are the NSFW on Instagram. You can also check out the website, ns-fw.com, if you're interested in joining or being part of this, or if you're interested in being a conspirator, because we are definitely looking for more people to spread it.
Amazing. I can definitely see the listeners of this podcast hopping onto that opportunity, because I truly believe that everyone that finds this conversation has such a purpose and power in bringing, sacred intimacy and expansive relating into their communities as well. So thank you again, Daniel, for joining me today. And I also want to express my gratitude to the listener. Thank you once more for opening yourself up to the idea of sacred sexuality. With so much gratitude and love, have a sexy and spiritual day. And I'll catch you next week on Talk Tantra to Me. Ta ta.